A very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in for today's webinar. It's a CPD webinar. As you all see, the chat window has been used. We have already provided the title along with the attendance link. Since it's a CPD, every 15 minutes once, we will be sharing the title details and the attendance link. Today's topic is Law of Expense Management. It's a 1 hour of CPD credits valid across various provinces, Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, New Brunswick. And we request you to use the phone audio if the audio is not clear here. We'll be sharing the phone audio coordinates on the chat window. For the ones who are not finding my voice clear here, I request you to connect through the phone audio. Great. And any questions at any time, I request you all to use the chat window, as I would be taking it at the end, or my teammate Amelia from support is also available here, who can take a few questions, make a note of it. Anyone asking question, and if you find us not responding, we request you to leave your email ID and we'll certainly get back to you post the session. Thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining in this afternoon with us. Let's kind of take a look at what Law of Expense Management has to do with managing client and business expenses, how it can pan out, keeping in mind all law society compliances and reports that needs to be maintained and recorded throughout the experience of managing expenses. Now, there are two types of expenses involved in here. The one, as you see, client expenses, client-related expenses, which is, of course, the disbursements. And the other one is business expenses or office expenses, which is common expenses, not anything specific to the client. So we're going to see how you're going to manage and what are the requirements. As you all can see agenda over here, we're going to first differentiate between disbursements and office expenses. We're going to see what are the disbursements, how do you manage them. Now, this is going to be a smaller version of disbursements demystified webinar. We do conduct disbursements demystified webinar, which is also a separate CPD session where we talk in detail about disbursements, types of disbursements, and the accounting format, etc., along with the law society compliances. However, for this one over here, we're going to see them in a slightly more brief level, and we're also going to see what are the office expenses or business expenses and how it is being managed, in the sense whether it has to be categorized, whether it has to be kind of recorded under a simple ledger. How does it? What are the types of expenses and how you cover the expense book, and what are the things that is recorded under it, like the method of payment, date. There's so much minute components that forms part of expense book, and how do you record them? And we're also going to see a little bit of analytics for expenses. Now, I will definitely utilize the uLaw platform towards the end to showcase you all what we're going to describe or what we're going to discuss in today's session. And I'll probably try to keep it as much as interesting as possible. Again, any questions anytime, welcome to put it on the chat window and we'll have it addressed shortly. Great. So as the topic goes by, law of expense management, when you take a law office, there are two different types of expenses involved in here, one being disbursement and one being office expenses or business expenses, as actually mentioned earlier. Disbursement. Now, this is a little confusing terminology to a lot, but to put it in a layman's term, disbursement is nothing but reimbursement of your client's expenses. These are expenses that you have incurred on behalf of your client, and you are entering them in your respective client's matter so that you can invoice them and get the money from the client so that you could pay yourself back for it. Now, this could be done from a standpoint of your client's expenses being made from trust or from general, keeping in mind how you need to record them into the books to balance out the accounts that you're spending it from, invoicing your client, most importantly, recovering the expense. Now, so far, we've spoken about what are disbursements, what is the need to record them. Why not have all expenses in one place? Then you're not going to see the actual financials if that's the case, because let's say you record them all as an office expenses. You don't record disbursement as a disbursement, but it goes under the office expenses part of it. Then end of the day, when you go and make an expense report, you're not going to have a bifurcation of client expense, which is called recovery of expenses, and your own office expenses. So to differentiate between both, we have this concept called disbursements and office expenses. You need to maintain proper books. Of course, Law Society requires you to do that. There's a separate compliance document that's called as general disbursement. We're going to see how your input transforms into output over there. In the meantime, understanding the difference between disbursements and office expenses. As already mentioned, disbursement is something that you can recover from the client at any time if you have adequate evidence to it, mentioning to your client that it was spent on behalf of them, and means that you get paid by your client for the same. And how do you track these disbursements? Now, one of the simplest ways to track your disbursement is when you pay it. When you pay it, you know you have spent it out of your pocket, or you know you've spent it out of your general account or your credit card, however you've spent for it. You could track your disbursement and enter it in your books of accounts in such a way that you can bring it under the respective ledger, which is client expense ledgers, and also the general disbursement journal, and into your HST or GST or PST reports, depending upon your province. So that way, the expense gets knocked off against the income, and you are having to pay the HST or the taxes appropriately to the government. Now, this is why you track them, importantly, to make these financial records, to make these compliances, to follow these requirements laid out by Law Society as well as by CRA. And of course, your client, end of the day, would like to know the details for expenses that you have made on behalf of them. If you don't track these expenses, unfortunately, you cannot calculate your profit. You cannot calculate the right profit. There would be some adjustments made. You cannot calculate your taxes. There's so much that you fall behind. Hence, there's many a times I've seen people recording their invoices very due diligently, right? Because obviously only if you raise an invoice, you get paid. But there's many times you don't report the expenses you have incurred because end of the day, the income you have received from the invoice you have raised knocks off against the expenses you have incurred and provides a adjusted profit, right? Or loss, of course. Now, this is the right way of accounting, and you definitely need to track these disbursements, and you have to make sure that you get paid or recover faster, most importantly of all. Now, to manage disbursement, what are certain things that you have to keep in mind? Like I said, this is a smaller version of disbursements demystified, so we're not going to go too much in depth about disbursements, but we at least need some points over here to understand how disbursements are managed. Now, disbursements are incurred on behalf of your client, so you need to explain to the client on the invoice the reason for the expense, how it was paid, and when it was paid, etc. So when, how, what are the three key terms when you start to enter a disbursement. Now, if you're using a program like uLaw, this will allow you to enter the disbursements very easily, as there's a separate column for disbursement, and it will also go into the respective journals and ledgers. Now, besides that, we always prefer you to use the client matter to enter the disbursement directly than entering it from the accounts, so that you don't mess up with client information. You don't mix up with the client information, rather. Now, if it's paid from the general account, you have to decide whether there's a markup portion, whether you're charging them a different amount, did you spend a different amount, what portion has to be charged to the client in the invoice, and what portion to be reported as an expense on the invoice, then to your books rather. And you need to preview the bill and you need to invoice the client so that you can recover the expense from them, get paid for it, and at the same time record the invoice and recovery of expenses. This is a whole cycle, because right from the time you meet the disbursement to the time you get recovered the expense amount, there's a cycle that you have to follow in order to make sure you're recording it appropriately, raising the invoice, collecting the payment, and of course, providing them with a receipt, as always. Now, besides this, what makes you decide how to spend the money from either trust or general? Now, there's always a little bit of confusion with this part. I know that many of you are scared to use trust or are not sure if I could use trust. So they end up using general account or their credit card or their own pocket. Now, there is something that you can very well keep in mind to use a trust account directly. Number one, if you're paying from trust, it can be any type of fee, like court filing fee or any reporting fee, any other kind of fee. That is always easier when paid from trust because there's no markup on it. You're not paying any lesser amount, which means that you're charging your client the same amount as you pay. Now, when paid from the trust account, you don't have to recover the expense. You don't have to literally recover the expense, right? Otherwise, you're paying out of your pocket, then you have to invoice the client, then they pay you as a retainer, then you transfer the money from trust to the general and pay yourself. There's about 2-3 steps involved here. But if you're paying from trust, as simple as that. You don't have to worry about getting reimbursed. You just directly pay it from the trust account and keep moving on, as simple as that. Now, it is not your money after all. So basically, you just have to show your expense from the trust. Rather your client's expense from the trust, and keep a track record of what it was paid for and all the bookkeeping from the bookkeeping standpoint of payment made to whom, when, what is the reason. Just these three, and directly. It obviously reduces the bookkeeping requirement because there's no invoicing required here before you transfer the money from trust to the general. There's no need to record the expense separately. There's no report expense separate. It all falls under one tab, which is pay straight from trust. Now, if it is that easy, why not just do that, right? But here's where the glitch is, or rather the catch is. Now, not all expenses are always fee, court fee, filing fee, etc. Or not always we only charge our clients, the appropriate amount there without any markup value. But if you are doing such things, unfortunately, you cannot do it straight from the trust because trust is your client's money and you cannot just like that mark up or invoice them for a higher amount, and it has to be dispersed from general. So eventually you have general, credit card, and any other account like cash account, owner's pocket, etc. Now here's where you record the expenses with the information, with the respective date, amount, taxes, method of payment, under the respective client and matter, and whether it was paid out of bank, credit card, personal pocket. Now over here, you will determine which amount needs to be added into the invoice and what is the portion that you're adding into the report expense part. Now, this is where the markup plays a role, and you can certainly decide by using the appropriate tabs. As you progress, when to recover the disbursement. Now, if you obviously, let's say you have money lying in trust, you can raise the disbursement at any time, at any juncture. And recording the expense, if you are covering this particular disbursement from the trust account, you will have to raise an invoice, record the expenses with the respective date, amount, reason, and then you move the money from trust to the general after raising the invoice. So you need to, before raising the invoice, you record all of these information, then you raise the invoice, then you get paid from trust via trust transfer if it is something you have paid from general. Now, if you have paid directly from trust, you don't have to worry about raising your invoice and getting paid from trust or doing a client payment to general, right? So these are the bookkeeping steps that you avoid and keep it simple, meaning if you're doing from trust. Now, if you're doing it from general, obviously you have to ensure what is the markup value, what is the markdown value, what is the amount before taxes, after taxes, and then the date of expenses, what it is done for. Raise an invoice, important point. Without raising an invoice, many of us just move on to transfer from trust to the general, and then you realize afterwards that you have missed a trust transfer entry in your respective program. Now, if it is paid by you from your personal money, you need to make sure that you are paying yourself after you transfer the money to the general account, right? So make sure you have all the ledgers and journals updated as per the Law Society, and the guidelines are being followed, and making sure you have all of these recorded at the respective dates. Now, there are some types of disbursements that also allows you to decide whether it's made from both trust and general or just general. Now, all billables can be done from both trust and general. All actuals can be done from both trust and general. Any expenses with profit margin, unit rate, mileages, travel time, they're all only general. And of course, consultancy with profit margin is also general. So anything with profit margin, anything with a markup value is always from the general account. Now, the outsourced consultancy on actuals are okay to be done from trust and general. So if there's anything with actuals, including or involving actuals, can be done from both trust and general. So there's nothing saying that only trust. If you notice here, there's only general. There's both trust and general. There's no disbursement. There's no type of disbursement that says only trust, because it's not always that a legal professional will have a trust account, right? It's maybe they're practicing with just general account. So there's always only general, or there's both trust and general involved. So you can choose one of them. But if you're using a trust account, remember you can never do anything other than actuals. Now, quickly about document that you need to report disbursements on. Because if you're using uLaw, these are all automated. The backend reports, the the inputs that you provide that gets converted into outputs are all automated, right? They come into the respective journals, ledgers, fee books, expense book, journal, general disbursement journal, everything. Now over here, these are during the audits, the disbursement ledgers and journals play an important role for both trust and general that are reviewed, making sure fee book, the appropriate taxes are collected, because fee book will tell you, if you're looking at the second picture on the top, you see the fee book. It has a separate column for fees billed and disbursements billed. So it bifurcates the fee further into legal fee and disbursements, which is captured, right? The following samples over here have adequate information on the ledgers and journals and fee book, expense book categories, where it will record information such as date, method of payment, particulars, what it was paid for, amount, and invoice numbers, if anywhere, receipt numbers anywhere. All of these being recorded due diligently into the respective samples that you're seeing here, or respective ledgers and journals. Now, if this has to be done while you're inputting information, there are respective blocks where you enter in such information, such as date and taxes amount. You just have to say whether it's taxes inclusive, taxes exclusive, taxes exempt, whatever. Making sure you enter them respectively, and you get to have these documents that are, that are reported to the Law Society and for your internal review as well. Now, what is a business expense? Just to take a quick pause to see if there are any questions from you all. That's nice. There's no questions so far. So just assuming that disbursements are clear. Like I said, there's a separate webinar on disbursements demystify where we'll discuss many examples and stuff. I think it's sometime this upcoming month in September. We will keep you posted on that on our webinar page. Moving on to business expenses quickly. Now, in a law office, like I already mentioned, there are two types of expenses. One is disbursements that we already saw. Another one is office expenses or business expenses. Basically, to run your practice, to run your business, you have things such as, let's say, rent, utilities, office supplies, other business expenses that you have to pay out to run your overall business or practice. And in layman's terms, it's nothing but expenses incurred for, running your office, just as simple as that. Now, it could be anything. It could be even your Electra, it could be your internet, it could be your phone. But without these, you cannot even run your office. You cannot raise a single invoice to get paid. You might kind of do the work, but if you're not incurring office expenses, it means that you're kind of wrong somewhere. You need to record it in the books. You need to balance it out with your accounts. You need to make sure that your expense minus your income minus expense provides you the profit you're able to profit or loss, and you're able to manage your taxes appropriately. So this will provide you with adjusted profit. Now, any types of expenses, very commonly seen office expenses are office utilities, bills like gas bills, electricity bills. You have advertisement, promotions. There are different categories. Now, these are some things that you want to make sure when you're recording an expense, you are able to subcategorize them well so that end of the year, you know what is your expense percentage on each of these subcategories. Now, it's easier to go and put them all as an office expense. But what is that office expense that you're covering? Whether you had bought stationery, whether you had spent for law society fee, whether you had spent for telephone and internet communication, or utilities like electric, gas. You know, there's so much that plays a role in bifurcating them or in categorizing them into different, types of expenses. And one such I would always recommend you to do is to categorize them under the respective headers, and that will allow you to kind of, manage your expenses properly. And of course, taxes, bank charges, rent, and salary, they are not subcategories, but they're also main office expenses. So you might want to make sure you have separate ledgers for them prepared. And how do you record them? Very simple. If you're using a program like uLaw, you just have to connect your bank and let the program do wonders for you. Now, if you're using manual data entry, here you got to do a little bit of, workaround. You have to make sure that you have enough knowledge on date and when it happened, what was the reason for this expense, whether it was made probably to, an office expense, opening office expenses, and making sure the date of expense, name, title, type of expenses, amount, method of payment, details about the payment like check number and transaction number, who it was paid to, what it was done for, and other things. Now, besides this, you also have to record them individually, or you could also record them as a bank import if you're using them through a bank import transaction. Or you also have to record them as a batch. Like, for example, you have, let's say you are having a simple bank connect, okay? And when you're connecting a bank, you can just add in all your expenses easily from uLaw. Connecting bank allows you to record expenses, record withdrawals. Now, there are different types of office expenses. It's not always just, making an expense for other purposes, but also so far what we discussed, like utilities, rent, and other things like law society fee. But you could also pay yourself, which is salary, or you make a payment to yourself as a consultant fee or something, which is also sometimes drawings from your office. So you do the drawings and make sure that you have to record them under the respective accounts, such as capital drawings account, making sure you also have to do them individually or through bank import when you're uploading the bank statement, or through the batch import when you connect your bank. Connect Bank works in uLaw. It allows you to record the transactions easily with simply connecting your bank and adding all the expenses, client expense, office expenses, bank transfer to make your credit card payments, drawings to pay yourself, so much more. So I'll be doing a quick demo of it when we are on the screen. Now, moving on to the documents that records office expenses. Now, we all know that you could download a general ledger for your office expenses. There's also expense book that shows you specifically the expenses you've incurred, whether it's a file related expense, which is client expense, or whether it is office expenses, as you're seeing here on the screenshot. There's also profit and loss statement, income and expense statement, HST report that records expenses, expense book, and also borrowings report that shows how you've maintained your office expenses. What are the components that needs to be entered due diligently to be seen on these outputs or reports, especially the date, the amount, with taxes, without taxes, before taxes, after taxes. Invoice numbers, descriptions, very important. They are the ones that go in the report. And that's how you build your reports with compliance, keeping in mind that, yes, you have covered all the fields. Not a single field here is left blank if you see. There's no question mark in description. There's no question mark in the taxes. So, I mean, of course, there's no question mark in the taxes means it's tax exempt, but I'm just saying, trying to mention that they're all complete. It's not incomplete. So make sure when you take a tiny task to enter the expenses, you are able to record all the information, sometimes the payment reference numbers, who you paid it to. These are all not given too much importance, but trust me, they go a long way when you take into consideration all these Law Society reports. Now, this is where Bank Connect has made a huge impact on people who are trying to save time and efforts. They just have to literally say the reference number and who it was paid to, and the rest all is automated, including the date, the description, the category also, and amount. Most of the times the categories are matched. Like, if it's a McD, uLaw chooses meals. If it is a gas, we choose gas, and bank charges. We are mostly very super sensitive towards these categories, and we pick the right one. But sometimes you find it not right or appropriate, or as per your wish, you can always swap them, you can always change them, but make sure you do enter them appropriately. Now, about expense analytics. Yes, once the reports are made, it's more of analytical reviews for you on how much expense you have made on your clients, how much expense you have incurred in your office expenses, what are your top expenses, what is the ratio of expenses, what is the health of your business, have you made any profit or loss. Analytics helps you visualize the data. You get more idea on the percentage through the pie chart diagram tables, and know the unknown and react to it and plan for it, making sure that you have all of it planned very well. And know the unknown and react to it is where you get to plan more, and you have these analytics helping you to see where you stand from this time. Now, I'll just take a quick second to pause here and show you all how uLaw works at our end, so you all get an idea as to these reports. So the disbursements are very well entered under matters. Now, there are two types of data entry here. You could either do it from the matters under the disbursements tab here, or you could just go to accounts. You could go to add expense. You could go to you could go to action expense, client expense. You could add this manually also from here and enter into the respective client and matter. Most important of all, right now we have import bank statement. If you're not importing a bank statement, simply connect the bank. All expenses show up here. Anywhere you want to take an action, let's say there's an Uber account. You want to do it as an office expense, go ahead, do Uber office expense. Automatically it shows as a travel category, subcategory. You see here I didn't have to click on travel, but it shows that. And the method of payment can be selected, and the reference number can be entered here. You can also say Uber there or paste it over here and enter the description as travel expenditure. You want to give different ideas, different names to it, feel free to do that. Everything that says already imported means it has already been imported into your books. You don't have to take any action. They're already been recorded in the respective dates. So you can do that. And it also allows you to fetch your bank statements to verify the expenses. And that way you're at the same page. Now, another way to do your disbursement, expenses which are disbursement, the best method to do, I would always mention, is to do an add new disbursement from matters. Now, when you do add new disbursements from matters, you are able to enter a disbursement from the disbursement page. And again, over here, we have bifurcated it as withdrawal from trust and withdrawal from general. So over here, when you withdraw from trust, you have to pay from trust, and you have when paid from trust, you have the details that you need to enter, all that we saw. There's a date. So let's say this happened on the 23rd, and let's say it was $250. Since I'm paying from the trust directly, I would like to say that I'm using the check method, and I am doing a court fee and paid to, let's say, Hamilton Courthouse. I can also print a check from here. So basically, I'm doing 3 things at a time. I'm just waiting for it to show up. Since it was closed, I'm just going to activate then. My bad. Just going to quickly show you all once again. Paid trust, record appropriate date, enter the amount, check number, description, let's say filing fee or court fee. Because you're doing it from trust, you want to make sure it's an actual amount and it's for court fee or filing fee. Paid to, and you also print a check from here. Click on payments. You can download the check, and this will provide you all the information as to your reports that you need to submit to the Law Society. So it doesn't stop here. You're able to do the reports, but at the same time, you're able to enter the expenses into the matter and also into your accounts under the respective account. Right now over here, we have the matter expenses under add new disbursements, withdraw from general, cash, other accounts. We have pay disbursements from general, cash, other accounts. We have pay disbursements from general for actuals. We have prepayment to disbursement and consultancy expenses. Now, when you're paying from general, as we already discussed, there can be actuals, it can be marked up values. So that's the reason we have a top portion and a bottom portion. And top portion can be entered with all the items, keeping in mind that you're not going to charge them. You don't have to literally keep in mind that you don't have to charge them a different amount, but you can absolutely do that when it comes to general. Let's say you're doing photocopies, very common expense. $40 plus tax is what you're charging them, but you're not reporting a single expense at the bottom, which means that it's an absolute profit to you. But let's say for some reason your printer is not working that day, or you don't have a printer at your office, you are having to do it from outside. So you go and click on the bottom pre-tax portion. Let's say you only spent $20 plus taxes. Now the difference between 40 plus taxes minus 20 plus taxes is an absolute profit to you. And once you do that, you're going to be able to come down. You're going to say how you spent for this $20 plus taxes. You're going to be able to enter the item details. Let's say you paid using your debit card or ATM debit. Enter the reference number. Even simpler if you want to enter, let's say UPS store where you printed it. Save it. Now when you draw an expense book, you very clearly see how you spent for it. And let's say we saw paid from trust, paid from general with the differences. Now paid from general with actuals, mileages. So billable is always actuals. So let's say you made a filing fee. Trust didn't have enough money, so you paid from your general account. Now there's no top and bottom portion if you all see here. I'm entering the amount only once, and it gets entered automatically. Fee for cap fees paid for client. So you're also able to report the expense under the respective journal. And that way you'll also be able to enter all of these information. And let's say paid to Hamilton Courthouse. You sent them a check. So the method of payment is recorded. Now, you might think why we're adding so much, but this gets transformed into your reports. So this is where I always mention that you need to enter all of these details due diligently. So this gets transcribed into your reports for your law society purposes, as well as your internal office and CRA. So you can download the check 2-in-1, 3-in-1. You record the expense in your client's invoice. You download the check, and you also report the expense into the respective reports. Once then, you also have other expenses such as mileages, unit rate, travel time. You can report them appropriately, and third-party consulting fees and prepayment to disbursement. As I already mentioned, we'll be looking into them in detail from, I think from the disbursement standpoint, disbursements demystified. Over here, currently, we do have all of these recorded in the expense reports and journals. We would like to see them, but in the meantime, I'm just going to quickly walk you all through the input expenses. So over here, office expenses can be manually entered. And when you enter the manual office expense entry versus the import bank statement or connecting your bank, there's a huge difference that you would see is that right from the date to the category to the description, everything needs to be entered. Of course, the amount not to miss. And paid to, let's say, and how did you pay for it? The method of payment. Reference number submitted. So far, you spent close to 2 minutes to enter the expense against probably 10 seconds to enter it yourself, like by importing bank statement, connecting to the bank gives you the expenses. You just have to click on take action, say office expense, and it will immediately provide you the date it's recorded, I think also the category is mostly aligned to the expense. You just have to decide on whether you do it over here, enter it there. You can enter most of it by cut, copy, paste, and just provide the same travel to coffee shop or travel to client's place, and you can record it appropriately and submit it, and the ledgers will have it entered them in. So let's say I want to do this report now. Now there are different types of reports that we saw from the standpoint of expenses or disbursements, office expenses or disbursements, which is recovery of expenses from the client. Now, of course, there are a bunch of compliances. Under compliance documents, there's monthly compliance, there's yearly compliance. Just have to click on monthly compliance to download clients' general disbursements. Let's say the general disbursement journal has a whole bunch of general disbursements that's being made. So whatever I've made, it comes up with the method of payment, with the description, with HST amount, whether it was done for a file, how do you bifurcate between, or rather differentiate between the two. The first entry you see here, all of you, has the check number, who it was paid to, rent, everything has been entered here, versus the second entry doesn't have a check number, doesn't have who it was paid to, and it's done for a filing fee for a specific file because there's a file number also entered in there. Now then, it is a tax exempt, so it won't be reported to your HST report also, and that would ease out your requirements to enter it in there. Now once that's been done, you also have, let's say when you go back into your document generation, taxes, HST, let's say we do again monthly download, we'll see how it looks in there. So you have the HST report, you have all the taxes recorded here for the taxes that's being paid out and for the taxes that's being received, and it gets knocked off against each, and you have the taxes owing at the bottom. So we have the rent, etc., photocopies that we paid for taxes, everything here, Uber and other things, travel expenditure, taxes on that, everything being entered here against that specific HST received. And while you're doing that, you also can find the same thing under expense book here. Under document generation, there is detail. You have, let's say, do monthly again and download, and you see this. Okay. And over here we have consultancy expense. 79.12 has been entered here. We have office expenses, travel miscellaneous, 99.12, and it goes on. So it has been bifurcated as office expenses. It has been bifurcated as client expenses. These are the two major things that you can see here. And for the bifurcation, because I have rent and taxes separately as a category and not a subcategory of office expenses. So subcategory of office expenses is further bifurcated as gas expense, travel expense, which means if there are only so many categories showing under the report, then I have not entered the categories, or rather I've not entered the transactions with the categories, because there are so many categories that can be put to use here. So I always request you, if you're using uLaw and you have office expenses, please do enter it appropriately. So that will help you to lead into this. Okay, and over here you also have document generation, profit and loss, showing the expenses again against the revenue. So the main part of recording the expenses appropriately is so that you can bring it under the respective reports, and it is being reported, you will have a vast idea of it. So I request you to please try to record all of these expenses under respective categories, under the respective, with the respective amounts and descriptions, and also the payment reference number, so you can track down these at later stages when you really need to, for some reason, let's say you're being audited and you need to track down these expenses. Then it becomes an easier way to report, generate this report and find out the reference numbers and track down the expense and go on from there. All right. And besides that, we also have this particular report that talks about expense book, monthly and timeline, which is very similar to the total, expenses that we did before. But in the expense book, the best part here is it brings in both your client expenses and your office expenses, and under your client expenses, if there's anything that is without HST, with HST, and then again, if there's any disallowed expenses, it also shows the disallowed expenses too. I'd like to mention here that there's not a single field that's missed in here. You see the client name, description, and expenses with taxes, without taxes, total, absolutely entered in there. So if there's anything that is missed, then you during the time you're entering the expenses, then you wouldn't see that item in the report over here. So that is the reason we say when you're making your entries, try to keep it due diligently, enter all the information as much as possible. That is why you have the ease of entering through the Connect Bank or through importing your bank statement, or maybe you want to make sure you record it due diligently on the same day. If you're not using something like uLaw or import bank statement or Connect Bank, try to record it on the same day so you have the physical receipt with you in the hand and you're able to enter these information. Now, alongside, you can also print your checks and otherwise keep a track of your checks and print GLs, all the ledgers and journals from the standpoint of expense ledger is also available for you in case you want to make sure client-wise expense ledger you have. So you want to make sure what was your client expense ledger today. So you have an expense made from the general account for Chicago Title Insurance, and you have it alongside with your details of your expense submitter. And please make sure you're entering the details of your taxes if there's anything. So it will also show that if it's tax exempt, it will show without taxes like this in the bracket. And you also have journals that, of course, you have separate journals. There's expense journal. If you want to do monthly expense, you want to do for all clients, or let's say you want to do only for one client, you could very clearly do that. Just to bifurcate if there's anything from the payment disbursement journal entry. So if there's nothing, you would not see that typically in there. So these are some reports that kind of help you to keep track of your expenses, not just your expenses, also the recovery of expenses. Now, if you're doing, if you go down this particular one, which is expense book, so you also see what is the fee that you have paid on behalf of the client and how much for that period, whether you have a recovery of expenses, anything. So expenses on clients' accounts is about 17,276.85, which is covering around 81% of this project. So this is one of the biggest, the one in blue is one of the biggest chunk where you have spent. So which is all mostly recovery of expenses. The rest of it is all a smaller percentage, and it will be very helpful for you to keep a track of your expenses, because end of the day, you having to record these expenses is not just for the law society compliances, or not from the reporting standpoint, but also to understand the health of your firm, where you're standing today, and also to kind of gauge your firm's health, right? Like, whether you are making a profit or loss and where you are spending more. And you can kind of do that even from the analytical standpoint. It doesn't always have to be from a, let's say from a, reporting standpoint, right? Because I understand everyone is very keen on doing your reports to Law Society and to CRA for your revenue, expenses, profit and loss. But we also want to show other things such as, let's say, expenses, which is from a standpoint of, your analytical view. And over here, you could again try the date range of monthly, yearly, annually, and keep going on. So let's say I want to do a little bit of research here to see what was my drawings by employee, what was my expenses chart by category, by clients, how much did I expend. I have so much here, and what was my analytical thing for expenses from uLaw Insights, and that will provide you all of these information, and you should have a good idea. Right, so I think we are almost to the fabulous of the webinar. I would request all of you to please make the best use of resources available, whether you're using manually or you're using your program to do it, but try to differentiate between office expense, disbursements, try to record them then and there when it happened, with all of these information, to whom it was paid, to the method it was paid, to record them individually, and also what is the business or office expenses, and also to make sure that all of these are appropriately shown on your relevant ledgers and journals. Of course, if you're using uLaw, you don't have to worry about showing it under relevant journals and ledgers as it's automated. But doing it on your own, you'll have to worry about bringing up those reports. Most importantly, don't forget to follow the norms behind raising invoices before getting paid or transferring from trust to be general, and keeping things straight from trust and general respectively, to record all the expenses, and making sure you are reporting them on time is also equally important. So I thank you all for attending today's webinar. I'm opening the floor for more chats now. I'm sorry, we don't take generally the chats, too many chats on the chat during the webinar time, but we are happy to take chats now, just so that we can, attend to that 1 hour of webinar. So for the ones who have questions regarding reporting, regarding disbursements, any questions regarding office expenses reporting, I'm happy to take the chats now. I'm sure Amulya has made note of the ones who have come and asked for some questions. We'll certainly revert them to the email and help you all with all your questions. But if there are any other questions, feel free to enter on the chat window now. Just to keep the recording short, I'm going to turn off the recording. Thanking you all for attending today's webinar. Catch you on the next Friday's webinar. And I think next Friday, if I'm not wrong, there's no webinar as there's a long weekend. Post that is going to be a CPD again. I'd like to stop the recording here and welcome all chats on the chat window over here. Thank you so much.